Hey everyone, this is Eric Pratt, Senior Vice President for Gun Owners of America, and I am proud to announce that GOA will be filing a lawsuit to gut the National Firearms Act of 1934. We're doing this now that Congress has reduced the tax on suppressors and short-barreled firearms from $200 down to zero. More on that in a moment. With Trump's big, beautiful bill set to become law, I wanted to take a moment to update you on what gun owners achieved or didn't achieve in the budget reconciliation process and tell you about our imminent fight to gut the NFA in federal court. But first, a quick message to Republican legislators on Capitol Hill. You just burnt a lot of goodwill with gun owners. You let an unelected bureaucrat in the Senate tell you that the only excise tax in history that cannot be repealed under the Byrd Rule is the National Firearms Act of 1934. Now GOA will have to finish the job in court at great expense, and we're going to remember this for a long, long time. Now, to all our gun activists and GOA members, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You publicly fought alongside of us, tooth and nail, for the last 2 months, and we are so grateful. Between our work behind the scenes since the November 2024 election and your melting of the phone lines and email servers on Capitol Hill, we came closer to gutting the NFA than anyone has since that infringement was passed 91 years ago. That's a historic achievement, and we're honored to have fought with you in the trenches, and we promise to continue the fight. This strategy is something that we actually spent the last year working on with our allies in Congress, and so we want to make sure that our members have a complete understanding of the situation, including our two-pronged strategy in the Senate. Not only that, but there's a lot of misinformation floating around that we have to correct. So here's what happened. Trump's one big beautiful bill was passed through a process known as budget reconciliation. That means that the bill itself had a lower voting threshold because it could pass the filibuster and clear the Senate with a simple majority of 51 votes. Bottom line, this meant that Republicans with a majority in both chambers of Congress and with control of the White House didn't need to negotiate with Democrats to pass the bill as they would have if there was a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. But there's a catch. A reconciliation bill can only make budgetary changes like altering the tax code. It can't change criminal code or be primarily policy related. So when Republicans started floating the idea of a budget reconciliation just after the November 2024 election win, we had an idea. The NFA is a tax, so why not use the budget reconciliation process to repeal the NFA tax and by extension, remove the registration requirements that come with the NFA tax? As I mentioned earlier, this kicked off a process where GOA's federal affairs teams spent countless hours researching this process and making sure that we could help House and Senate offices with the correct language to get this passed and get through the very tricky reconciliation process. AMOLAN wrote about this recently, about how GOA pioneered this fight and came up with this strategy to gut the NFA while bypassing the filibuster. Most of the members of Congress, committee staff, even other gun groups wanted to stop short from the beginning and fought GOA to only reduce the NFA tax to $5 and only for suppressors at that. Well, our lobbyists were asked time and time again to stop pushing the Short Act, but GOA led the fight, developed the strategy, and moved the Overton window to include short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and AOWs in addition to suppressors. We also shifted the conversation to fully repealing the NFA tax, not just reducing it to $5 or $0. Well, GOA never compromised in this, and we won several grassroots battles along the way. We defeated the Ways and Means Committee's compromise in the House. Plus, we convinced House leadership and the Senate Finance Committee to take up GOA's language in their respective chambers. That's what we were working hard for from the outside. On the inside, got to give a big thank you to Representative Andrew Clyde and Senator Steve Daines for helping us get the full repeal for suppressors and short-barreled firearms. However, there was still one big battle, one big hurdle, and in the federal code, it's known affectionately as the Byrd Rule. The Byrd Rule determines what makes it into a reconciliation bill, and it's also administered by an unelected bureaucrat known as the Senate parliamentarian, who isn't even a senator. Basically, if the parliamentarian, or parl for short, decides that our language isn't primarily tax-related, and she thinks it's primarily a policy, then anti-gun Democrats can have it easily removed. And to override her ruling, it requires that the House muster 60 votes to add the language back in. To be clear, Democrats are united in their opposition, meaning any language that does not pass the Byrd Rule would have to be revised to comply, or conversely, Senate Majority Leader John Thune could fire the parliamentarian so that we can get a new one who is not a Democrat partisan hack. And so that's where we stand today. After working for months to remove the taxation and registration requirements from the NFA, the Senate parl struck down our language, claiming that it was policy instead of being tax-related. Well, we eminently disagree with her ruling. In fact, the NFA is the first excise tax in history to be ruled non-compliant with the Byrd Rule. Not exactly the way we wanted to make history, but what do you expect from a Democrat appointee? Yeah, she was appointed 23 years ago by Democrat Senator Harry Reid. Remember him? Anyway, her partisan ruling flies in the face of court rulings like the Sonzinski versus U.S. case from 1937, where the entire decision hinged on the fact that SCOTUS ruled the NFA is in fact a tax. Just goes to show that when it comes to guns, politicians and bureaucrats will throw all the rules out the window. Needless to say, we're furious with the Senate parliamentarian, and the first thing I did was issue a statement from GOA calling for the firing or overruling of the Senate parliamentarian, and we're still calling for her to be fired today. But Leader Thune didn't immediately fire her, and under the parl's ruling, the Senate was only allowed to include the $0 tax stamp for suppressors, SBRs, SBSs, and AOWs, while retaining all the gun control. Objectively speaking, this was the maximum bite we were allowed to take under the parl's decision under the Senate rules, but it's not the win that we and our members wanted, and it's also still a far cry from what GOA spent the last year fighting to accomplish. And that's exactly what GOA said in a joint statement with several other gun organizations. Remember, the NFA is 91 years old, and this is the closest any of the language has ever come to being repealed. If GOA had just quit the fight with the parl then and there, gun owners might not have ever gotten another chance like this for another 100 years. Our consolation prize is that we've increased access to suppressors and short-barreled firearms for those who cannot afford a $200 tax stamp, and that we set ourselves up for a legal challenge against the NFA. We understand that our recent joint statement made some folks mad, but we knew with that change, we had a path forward via litigation. You know, at the time, that wasn't something that we could publicly say, because sometimes our strategy works best if it isn't plastered on social media for Democrats, or in this case, the parliamentarian, to hear. If we had talked about a forthcoming lawsuit, the parl could have used that to rule against us once again and said we were trying to change the underlying policy rather than just trying to reduce the tax. She could have removed it then with a snap of her fingers. So now that the $0 NFA tax stamp is in the bill and was protected by the Byrd Rule, it has become law. While it's a small step forward, it isn't what GOA fully fought for. We didn't give up, and we continued fighting to overrule and fire the parliamentarians. Still, as we feared, our calls to do this fell on deaf ears in the Senate and later in the House. And as far as I've seen, only Senator Marshall, our Short Act sponsor, and Senators Tuberville and Paul wanted to fire the parliamentarian. So in the end, the House and the Senate only passed the bare minimum version, which removes the taxes on short-barreled firearms and suppressors, but unfortunately keeps the registration requirements. We know that the tax is the least of the problems with the NFA. The registry must be dismantled along with taxation. Dealing with one without the other is only a half measure. And while I know that merely getting the $0 tax isn't ultimately what we wanted, there is a silver lining. More suppressors will be sold, and we'll have a better argument to challenge the NFA in court. As I mentioned earlier, GOA has already announced that we are going to file a lawsuit to remove suppressors and short-barreled firearms from the National Firearms Act of 1934. And we'll be joined by other groups, so just follow us on X and stay tuned for more details about this for when and where it happens. Now, having said all this, I hope that one thing is standing out to you loud and clear. GOA is still fighting to fully repeal the NFA excise tax on silencers and short-barreled firearms and to eliminate federal gun registration. We're not giving up on the fight. Just look at our website and view our legislative alerts. To the last day, we continued to fight for the full repeal of suppressors and short-barreled firearms from the NFA through Congress. And we encouraged House reps and the White House to support the GOA-backed Clyde Amendment, which would have defanged the NFA, repealing the taxes and registration for all the items that I just mentioned. And we tried to help the House amend the bill and send it back to the Senate to be voted on again, so that then the Senate would be forced to fire or overrule the parle. All to say, we have never settled for the current language, and we're certainly not going to stop doing everything in our power to fully remove suppressors and short-barreled firearms from the NFA. Unfortunately, because of the complexity of this issue, grifters and scam artists have used this opportunity to enrich themselves off of misinformation and deception. Yes, while GOA was fighting a two-pronged strategy, our detractors were attacking us for not fighting. But they were the ones who weren't lifting a finger for gun owners. I mean, we couldn't make this up if we tried. For example, one of the most ludicrous attacks was an accusation that GOA cut a deal with leader Thune, and that we waved the white flag and agreed not to fight for NFA repeal. Again, if you look at our website, you'll see that's a lie. In fact, there's one group out there that is settling for the $0 tax, and which endorsed the Senate version of H.R. 1 with only the tax, and guess what? It wasn't GOA. Maybe our detractors have us confused with somebody else. Another misinformed accusation was that GOA endorsed Senator Thune, but that's completely false too. We never have. You know, it's odd. They claim that GOA isn't in the trenches fighting for our rights, but GOA is the only group to file lawsuits against all three of the Biden-era ATF rules and 2 lawsuits against the zero-tolerance policy. Last year, we also helped secure a historic funding cut to ATF's budget, canceling a whole new class of agents, and forced Biden to end a 3-decade-old gun ban program for veterans. I could go on, but like I said earlier, to this day, we continue to fight for a full repeal of suppressors and short-barreled firearms, and we have never wavered from that path. I can tell you this, as gun owners of America, it is our honor to represent gun owners across the country with integrity. We work with diverse groups with whom we don't agree 100% on every issue, But the lies and dishonest tactics by scam artists must be called out for what they are. It has been our policy not to get involved in feuds with other gun rights organizations. We pride ourselves on working with like-minded groups. When there's an opportunity to fight together, to fight for the defense and restoration of the Second Amendment, we will always work together. But when lies and dishonest communications cause confusion and harm to the Second Amendment community, we want the truth and facts to speak for themselves. You have my promise that GOA is committed to honesty, integrity, and transparency. We will never stop fighting in the state capitals and in Washington, D.C. to protect and defend the Second Amendment. And we stand ready to work with any group who shares our goals in any given situation. Remember, no matter what, there's actually a silver lining to this situation. Just around 3 years ago, 65 senators voted to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Now we're talking about dismantling one of the foundational pillars of gun control in this country, the National Firearms Act. A year ago, did you even think this could be possible? Well, we did at GOA, and that's why we crafted the strategy to lead this fight. GOA will continue to battle on behalf of our members. We'll continue to be the only no-compromise group in Washington, D.C., and we're not giving up on abolishing all gun control nationwide. Today, we're going to continue to fight to repeal the NFA in court by challenging this new $0 tax stamp. And in the meantime, our team on the Hill will keep looking for other ways to fully repeal the NFA through Congress. Thank you all so much for your support and activism. We couldn't do any of this without you. God bless.